kiddos, welcome to Bible class. It's Mr. Michael here with you again. I'm so glad you're here for our story today. We're on lesson number 11 in our workbooks, and it's called David's Son Absalom. But before we get into our lesson for today, let's talk about our memory verse. We haven't done a lot on this one since we've had a new memory verse, but it comes from 1 Kings chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. 1 Kings chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. And for right now, we're just going to read it the way it is in our books here on chapter 11. And then we'll come back and talk more about that in our other video later this week. It says in 1 Kings chapter 2, verses 1 through 3, David gave orders to his son Solomon. He said, I'm about to die, so be strong. Do everything the Lord your God requires. Live the way He wants you to. Alright, we'll be talking more about that. But for our lesson today, we've been talking about David for the last several weeks now. We've talked about how he became king and how even before he became king, he had respect for King Saul. He showed humility. He waited until God's time was right for him to become king. And then we talked about some of the good things that he did as king, how he showed kindness to Mephibosheth and the other good decisions that he made. And we talked about how even when it was that he made bad decisions, that he still repented. He still confessed those sins. We talked about that last week. Confess. He told everybody the truth about what he had done, and he asked everyone to forgive him, and he asked God to forgive him. So he came back to God, and he continued to walk with God. So those are all good lessons for us to learn. And just like our memory verse talks about one of David's sons named Solomon, David had several sons. And we're going to be talking about another one of his sons today. This son was named Absalom. Can you guys say Absalom? Absalom, sadly, did not choose to follow God the same way that David and Solomon did. You see, Absalom had pride in his heart. The Bible says that Absalom had very long, very pretty hair, and he was so proud of it. And he was just full of pride, and he thought he was such a good-looking guy, and he thought he would make such a great king, and he was so ready to become king. But do you remember how we talked about David being patient and David showing humility before it was time for him to become king? Absalom didn't do that. Absalom tried to make himself king, and it was not good. You see, during those times, if there were people who lived in the kingdom of Israel, just regular people like you and me who needed some help or some advice with something, they would go to the king and ask King David for advice about what they should do with whatever it was that was going on in their life. Well, Absalom thought that he would do a pretty good job of giving people advice, so he started going there to Jerusalem, and when people were on their way to go see King David and ask for advice, Absalom would catch them before they got to the king and say, hey, I can give you advice. Come tell me what's going on. I'll be glad to help you. And so Solomon, he found lots of people, and he gave them advice, and the people really liked him. They thought, wow, Absalom gives good advice. He's got such good-looking long hair. Oh, he's young, he's handsome, he gives good advice. I think he would make a good king. So people started talking about that. They started talking to each other, and there were lots of people who thought that, even though David was still the king, and David was still trying to follow God. Well, one day, Absalom went to his father, King David, and he asked, can I go to Hebron? I made some promises to God, and I need to go to Hebron to go ahead and finish my promises that I made to God. And David didn't know anything was going on, so he said, Sure, go ahead and go to Hebron. Hebron was another town not too far from Jerusalem, but it was outside of Jerusalem. So, when Absalom goes to Hebron, it doesn't have anything to do with the promises he had made to God. He goes to Hebron and he talks to all the other Israelites and he says, "Hey guys, remember me, the one who gave you advice? Aren't I so young and good looking and handsome and have such great hair? Don't you think I would make a great king?" And so he gets a big crowd of people there at Hebron who want to make him king instead of David. And so they are ready to follow Absalom and to start a war to kick out David and make Absalom the new king instead. Well, when David, back at the palace in Jerusalem, when he hears about this, it makes him sad. It makes him sad that Absalom would do these tricks like this. So David knows that they would want to come and fight, so he leaves Jerusalem. David leaves his own home, his own hometown, and he leaves town. He walks out of town on foot. And there are some people who said and did some mean things to him as he was leaving, but he left it behind. But several people were still faithful to God and faithful to David, and they went with David as he was leaving Jerusalem. And so there were lots of people who went out into another town not too far away. And so when they left, then Absalom and all of his people came from Hebron and came to Jerusalem and said, "Oh, it's our kingdom now." Well, it wasn't very long until there was a war. There were battles between Absalom's followers and David's followers. And so one day when they were going out to battle, David was getting ready. He wanted to go into battle with his followers. He thought, "I'm still strong, I can still do this." But the followers said, "No, it would be better if you just stayed here for now." And so David said, "You've got to make me one promise. If you're out there in battle and you see my son Absalom, you've got to be nice to him. You've got to be kind. Promise me nothing bad will happen to Absalom." You see, even though Absalom had such pride in his heart and was doing such mean things to David, David still loved his son. He loved him very much, and he didn't want to see anything bad happen to Absalom. So David sent out his 3 commanders in charge of the army as they went into battle with the followers of David fighting against the followers of Absalom. And it just so happened during the battle that day that Absalom was riding on his mule, and as he was trying to get away, that long dark hair that he was so proud of, as he was riding under the branch of a tree, his hair got caught in a tree limb. And it hung there. It got wrapped up so bad he was stuck. And his mule just kept right on running, but he was stuck, hanging from that tree limb. He couldn't get down, he couldn't do anything. Then some of David's followers found him there. And they saw him there, and they knew that David wanted them to be nice to him. So they didn't do anything to hurt him at first. But then, you remember those 3 commanders that David put in charge of the army? One of those commanders came by, and he saw Absalom. Saw him in that helpless situation hanging from that tree branch. And that commander chose to kill Absalom. And so in one sense, it was kind of good news because the battle was over and Absalom's followers quit and they weren't going to fight anymore. But David was oh so sad. When they came back and they told David the news, he was mourning. Mourning means to just be so sad to have so much grief about what happened. Even though Absalom had done such mean things, David didn't want to see anything bad happen to him. He definitely didn't want his own son to die. After a little while, after David was finished mourning, it didn't happen the very next day, but before long, David returned to Jerusalem. And as he came back to Jerusalem and he was king again, it took a little while to get everything straightened out. But the important thing about when David returned to Jerusalem, you remember how I said earlier that when he left Jerusalem, there were some people who said and did some rude things to him, and they didn't treat him with respect as he was leaving because they thought they had a new king. They thought Absalom was going to be their new king. Well, that didn't last long, but those people who had been so rude to David when he was on his way out of Jerusalem, how do you think David responded to him when he came back to Jerusalem? Do you think he was rude back to them? Do you think he repaid evil for evil? The New Testament tells us not to do that. No, David did not do that. David was kind to them. He forgave them for the mean things they had said and done. And he tried to bring everyone together. He didn't want Israelites to be fighting against each other. He wanted them to all be united in following God. And that's what a true leader does. Helps to unite the people. So let's remember that. Let's all try to follow God together and learn these lessons from King David and how he obeyed God and not have that pride in our heart like Absalom did. Alright, well thank you guys so much for being here with me for Bible class time today. I hope you have a good week and I'll see you in a couple days. Bye-bye.